Hi, guys.
Shalom, Betsy.
Hi, Betsy. Shalom.
Shalom.
All right, let's get started. Baruch atah yeh Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah yeh v'noten ha'torah b'shem Yeshua Mashiach. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so somebody want to recap what we did last week? We finished in regard to the seventh feast. So anything, did anybody learn anything new last week, or is it sticking out, or anything unresolved that you need answered before we move on? Don't all talk at once.
Ready for Hanukkah.
Okay, well then we'll just move on.
Do you think there was anything, the strips of cloth that were used to wrap him as a child? It's also mentioned he was wrapped in strips of cloth in his burial. I wondered if it could have been the same material.
Probably the same material, but I don't think it was strips of cloth. It was a linen shroud.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
burial cloth. It wasn't strips, but it was probably the same material. But
Okay.
just
Thank
because
you.
I'm pretty sure it was linen on both of them. But the strips that were used for what most people call swaddling cloth, which is not an erroneous translation, but I meant to bring it up last week, but I did not. They were actually the ones that were used for the torch in the temple were the old robes, the old linen robes of the Kohanim, the priests. They were cut into strips and then made, used for wrapping the end of a torch in to make a torch out of. So it's just interesting that it was the clothing of the priests that was alluded to there. Okay, let me try to organize here.
What are you doing?
So we are going to start in Hanukkah. So last week we finished up the 7 yearly feasts. And I told you that we would go ahead and do Khanukah and Purim, hopefully this week. I think we can at least I know we'll get Hanukkah done. I'm hoping we can get Purim done. We're not going to go into just all kinds of detail on Purim, but I just wanted to bring up the fact that it is something that we celebrate. And it does have sort of Messianic / prophetic overtones. So I do want to take a look at it. But let me share.
Shalom, everybody.
Shalom, Tracy.
Hey, Tracy. Shalom.
Okay, you guys see my Siddur now?
Mm-hmm.
See it.
Okay. So before we dive into that, who can take a stab at sort of summarizing what Hanukkah is, when it is, what it's about, that kind of thing?
Well, I know that, I don't know what group of people, I don't remember offhand, but there was a group that had invaded and had kind of taken over the temple, and they had forced the people to eat pork and all kind of vile things inside the temple, and there was a revolt by the Maccabees and drove them out and was able to reclaim the proper service of the temple. And that's about where I'm at.
Okay, not bad. So, and I better get my controls back up here. or someone will be texting me probably. So yeah, so in about 260 BC is when I think it was, or is it 160? Let me think. Yeah, I think it's like 160 BC. You had a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes ruling half of what used to be, or 1/4 of what used to be the Alexandrian Empire, the Greek Empire. So it was Greeks. He was Greek, and he had taken a lot of the land around Israel, and I think also Egypt. But in all his conquering, he conquered Israel, and he made it illegal to basically keep Judaic faith, whereas Alexander was very accommodating, and other Greek kings were very accommodating of local religions on any land that they conquered. They allowed them to continue their religion. They just added them to their pantheon, but Antiochus Epiphanes did not. I personally believe that he was a fulfillment of one of the kings, the fourth king in Daniel. I believe it's Daniel 11, where Daniel prophesies the breakdown of that Alexandrian Empire. And so I think he is fulfilling some or all of that on sort of in the first layer of it, because I do believe that there's a lot of the same things that happened then are going to happen again. But nonetheless, he defiled the temple, put a stop to the sacrifices, would not permit them to circumcise their children, would not permit the study of Torah nor praying in Hebrew, would try to make them not speak Hebrew, tried to purge the land of the Hebrew language. And that is one reason that a lot of especially the faithful religious Jewish people, despised the Greek religion. So it did not become the de facto language of Israel, and that was a big reason for it, is because of what Antiochus Epiphanes did. So that went on for about 3.5 years or so. I forget the timing on it. It's not important to what we want to get out of it, but 3.5 years to somewhere between 2.5, 3.5 years, the temple was not operating. There were no services going on. And so the Maccabees, there was a guy named Judah Maccabee who rose up, had 12 sons. Maccabee means hammer. And they created an army. And ultimately, the older son, because I believe Judah Maccabee died, if that's the dad, he died. And one of his sons took over and ultimately conquered just a handful of farmers and a ragamuffin army, basically, of Israelis, conquered the Greek army that was occupying their land, drove them out of the temple. Antiochus Epiphanes had erected a statue of Zeus in there and had sacrificed a pig in the Holy of Holies and stood there and declared that he was God. And so when they rebelled and won and drove out the Greeks, then they wanted to restart temple service. If you remember, both times that the temple was inaugurated, what I mean is Solomon's temple. Actually, let's go all the way back to the tabernacle. So 3 times. The tabernacle, Solomon's temple. Let me just stick with Solomon's temple because I think I'm going a little too far there. Solomon's temple and Ezra's temple were sort of anointed, consecrated, inaugurated on the first day of Sukkot. And so the Maccabees won the battle on the 25th of Kislev, which is the 9th month, which is equivalent to December. It wasn't the 25th of December when this happened. It was the 25th of Kislev. Okay, why would that be a critical distinction to make?
Because the 25th of December is the time when all the pagan religions said that their God was born, or
Bingo.
Yeah.
So this was the 25th of Kislev, the 25th of the 9th month on the biblical calendar. You got to remember they were still doing it biblically back then. So They won, and they did not want to wait for another 9 months, which is what it is from Hanukkah to Sukkot. They didn't want to wait another 9 months to reinitiate temple worship. They wanted to go ahead and do it. And so they kept a Sukkot out of season. So they kept an 8-day feast out of season. And that is called the Feast of Sukkot. But if you will notice something, let me see if I can think of where it is right quick. Let's see how good my memory is. Not that good. It's 30 something. I want to say it's 31. No.
Oh, we saw the word sukkah in what you just flew through.
Thought it was 34, but maybe it's 36. If not, I'll have to.
Tell us what you're looking for.
The dedication psalm, I thought it was in the 30s, but apparently it's not. All right, let me find it another way. No, David did it, dear. Melly, you can't hear her. She's in the
It
living room.
does say Psalms 30.
Is it 30? I didn't go back far enough.
Yep.
I thought it was in the 30s, but I guess I didn't go back. Yeah, there it is. Mizmor Shir Khanukah Habayit LeDavid. Mizmor Shir Khanukah Habayit. What is Habayit? Bueller?
House,
House, the house.
the house.
So what is Khanukah?
Dedication.
Dedication, the dedication of the house. All right. So the word Khanukah means dedication. And that's exactly what it was. It was the dedication of the house. And so David wanted to build the house. He may have dedicated his own house with this psalm, or he may have written this for Shlomo, his son, to dedicate God's house. Either way, it's fitting. But look at how it reads. I will extol you, O Yahweh, for you have raised me up and have not suffered my enemies to rejoice over me. O Yahweh, my Elohim, I cried unto you, and you did heal me. O Yahweh, you brought my soul up from Sheol. You did keep me alive, that I should not go down to the pit. It's a little bit messianic, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Sing praise unto Yahweh, O you his chassidim, and give thanks to his kadosh name. His anger is but for a moment, his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may tarry for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Twice now, the Jewish people have wept over the loss of their temple. And what I'm talking about is the destruction of the first one and the rebuilding of the second one, and then the defilement of it and the rededication of that same, because it was still the second house in the time of the Maccabees. Is everybody with me?
Yes.
Now I had said in my security, I shall never be moved. You had established, O Yahweh, in your favor my mountain as a stronghold. You did hide your face, I was terrified. Unto you, O Yahuwah, did I call, and unto Yahuwah I made supplication. What profit is there in my blood when I go down to the pit? Shall the dust praise you? Shall it declare your truth? Hear, O Yahuwah, and be gracious unto me. Yahuwah, be my helper. You did turn for me my mourning into dancing. You did loose my sackcloth and gird me with gladness, so that my glory may sing praise to you and not be silent. O Yahuwah, my Elohim, I will give thanks unto you forever. A little bit odd for the dedication of a house, don't you think?
Yeah, actually.
It just doesn't seem like what one would think about when you're going to dedicate your house. But there's a theme here of resurrection and of destruction and coming back. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what Khanukah is. And so that's why I said at the beginning of this, it's kind of messianic in nature, the holiday is. What do our Jewish people call it other than Khanukah?
Feast of Lights.
The Festival of Lights, that's right. And the reason for that is, Bueller.
Oh, because of the miracle of the lampstand. Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to agree with that miracle because I can't find any evidence of it in antiquity.
But is it not why they call it that? They have a different reason for calling it that besides that?
They call it that. I'm just saying they don't. I only believe divinely inspired scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no early writings that speak of that miracle. If you look in the Mishnah, which was written in the 2nd century, which was only 100 and barely 200 years after this, there's no mention of a miracle. As to my knowledge, I don't think that Josephus mentions a miracle at Khanukah either. If he does, I don't know it. And I have read everything that he wrote, or a lot of it, I should say, and I didn't see anything. I don't find anything on that. So I'm not going to say that it was a miracle. What I am going to say is it was probably miraculous that they had enough oil to burn the menorah for 8 days. But I'm not going to say that it was a creative miracle. I can't prove that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. But the theme of it carries anyway. So what she's talking about, if anyone is not aware, is that there is a rabbinic tradition that they did not have enough oil, and they only had enough oil for one night. And if you remember, that's a pretty big menorah, and the bowls on top of it were pretty big, and it required a lot of oil just for one night of burning. And the rabbinic tradition is that they filled the menorah up on the first night, only having enough for one night, and the oil burned for 8 nights. I'm saying I can't prove that, and I only put my trust in things that I can prove. So scripturally, by divinely inspired people, and the rabbis are simply not. But nonetheless, it may have come from the fact that they had enough to actually burn for 8 nights, because what the book of Maccabees does say is that they celebrated Sukkot in the month of Kislev. And they couldn't have done that without oil. So it was a miracle that they found any oil, probably, because if you remember, there was destruction going on. There's a very particular type of oil that has to be used for the menorah. It does take time to make it, and 8 days probably wouldn't be enough to make it. So the fact that it was there would in itself be a miracle. Does everybody understand that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're saying that a miracle happened, but what exactly that miracle was, we don't know for sure.
Exactly. And I can't attribute it to some rabbis who just because they have made up other things like that. Mm-hmm. So, but nonetheless, the fact that they were able to celebrate Sukkot out of season and actually dedicate the house and restart, come up out of the pit, if you will, be rescued from destruction, the way David's psalm said, all of that was indeed a miracle. It was a miracle that the Maccabees beat that army back. So that in and of itself is enough of a miracle to celebrate. Okay, so so they began to keep that feast for 8 days, and it came to be called the Feast of Khanukah, the Feast of Dedication. So I'm trying to think in my mind of where I want to go next. You guys still see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So we have liturgy in our Siddur, and you can see that it's very brief. And so what we do is read this passage out of Yeshayahu 9, 1 through 3, which is pretty traditional on Chanukah. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwelt in the land of Tzal Mavet, what is that?
The land of death.
The land of what?
Evil.
Death.
Death.
The shadow of death.
Or shadow.
Shadow right there.
Okay.
Upon them has the light shined. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased their joy. They joy before you according to the joy in harvest. What time is harvest?
Spring. No, wait. It would be fall. Yep.
Sukkot is the time of harvest. As men rejoice when they divide the spoil, for the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as in the day of Midian. So that sounds like to me an appropriate scripture to read on Khanukah, right? Fits the theme, does it not?
It does.
Yes.
And here we're quoting this one of the Tehillim that we are saying every day right now. Yahweh ori v'yishi mimi ira, Yahweh ma'oz chayai mimi echad. He is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? Yahweh is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? A stronghold, okay? And so later on in rabbinic tradition, let's continue first. Light is sown for Hatzadik and gladness for the upright in heart. Be glad in Yahuwah, you tzaddikim, and give thanks to his consecrated name. So that's about the light. Hanukkah being the Feast of Lights. And of course, we add Ani or ha'olam, kol ha'holech acharai, lo yitalech b'chachshacha, ki or ha'chaim yelo. I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but he shall find for himself the light of life. And it's shortly after this passage in Yochanan 8, over when Yeshua heads to Jerusalem for the Hanukkah festival. Okay? And if I remember right, Yochanan 8 is Sukkot. And the end of 9 and the early part of 10 are Hanukkah. Okay? And then we have the standard blessing that we do over the Chanukiah. And then we have the standard blessing that we do over every season when we come to it. Does anybody have any questions about those? Because we are studying our Messianic life in general, who can describe successfully how to light the Chanukiah?
You like the shamash first?
You light the shamash first.
Which is?
Is the center one?
Okay, center one.
Well, it is, but many times
Oh, yeah. Some
it
of them
doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Whichever one is the shamash will be the one that stands out.
Okay.
Be a lower or higher.
Lower, higher, off to the side. There's people do it in different ways. Many times it is in the middle though. And it's higher, but that's just not all the time. Go ahead.
Okay.
There it is right there.
I I think, I'm not sure, but I think you're supposed to load it up right to left and then light it from left to right. But I'm not positive.
Yes, but we need further description. So yes, so there are 8 lights with a servant, which is 9. The servant is called shamash, which is a Hebrew word for servant.
So it's like a menorah, but with 9 lights in it, or 8?
It is a 9-lamped menorah, yes.
9 lamp. Okay.
See that?
A menorah is 7 lamps. A Khanukah looks like a menorah in many cases, doesn't have to, but most of the time it does. And it has 8 regular lights and 1 service light, 1 shamash,
Okay.
which is a 9th. So when you light it, if you want all your candles in it, some people can't because the candles are too close together and they'll burn each other when they're not supposed to. So let's say it's the first night. You're going to put 2 candles on your menorah, 1 in the shamash and 1 in the far right. You're going to light the shamash, and then you're going to light the candle on the far right. And I'm saying that from the perspective of you having your menorah in the window, because that is the ancient tradition, is that you put it in the window. Okay. What we do in our home is have some for the window, but we have a main one in our living area, dining area. Okay.
So when you're saying the right,
say again.
I'm sorry. So when you're saying you light the one on the right first, that's as the perspective of if you're outside the window looking in at it. So
no. You're looking at it. It's on your right. You're looking out the window. The menorah is in front of you. You put the first light in the spot on your right, the furthest spot to your right.
So from someone from the outside looking in, it'll be on their left. Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
So on the first night, what you're gonna do is light the shamash, pick up the shamash, and light the first light. And you're done. You put the shamash back in its spot. You've said the blessing. You're done. On the second night, what are you going to do?
Add 1 more candle, and then the candle directly to the left of the first when you put it in, and light the 2 of them with the shamash.
Light the shamash first. Light number 2 first, because it's the second night. And then light number 1. Got that, Joe? I see you processing. You got it?
I'm processing. Yeah, I think I got it.
And it goes on down the line. So on the 3rd night, shamash 3, 2, 1. On the 4th night, shamash 4, 3, 2, 1. On the 5th night, shamash 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's jump to the 8th night, shamash 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay.
Everybody got it?
Yep.
That is, there's nothing compulsory about it. And so on that note, this is not a commanded feast. So we don't make it in our community. We don't make it compulsory. We don't say that people have to do it, but there are reasons that we do it, and we're going to get to that. But you don't have to light it this way, but customs are good, and they unify us so that when we share Khanukah, when we go to someone's house, we do it the same way. No one's lost. Okay. But just remember what I want you focusing on. If we are here to keep Khanukah this year, you're gonna go through Sukkot, and then you're gonna come to Khanukah a couple of months later, and it's the darkest time of the year, and we're gonna talk about that. And you're keeping a Sukkot out of season. It's almost like a refresher before you get to Passover. It's almost like to break up the monotony of winter. And I do believe that even though Elohim did not command it, that I do believe he played his part in it. And so you'll hear Jewish people talk about the miracle of Hanukkah. And there was like we've already talked about, there was a miraculous nature to it. But the more important thing is that Israel was spared from destruction, and that the keeping of the Torah became permitted again, and freedom was given to the people again, and the teaching of the Torah went about again, and the keeping of Sabbath, and all of those things. So it's as much about freedom as it is about cleansing the temple. So just keep that in mind as you're doing it this year. Okay, so you've lit the lights. The lights are lit. What else do? We in our home have attempted to learn this. You don't sing it every day, so it's oh, I've got something to fix right there. Maybe not. I don't know. Let's look. We've attempted to sing it because it's there's two different versions of this. The traditional version. There's multiple different versions of it. But Ma'oz Sur, Rock of Ages, the Rock of My Salvation. And it's a pretty long, so what we'll do is we may sing. If you sing the song, it's typically just the first couple of verses. If you don't sing it, you just read it all the way through. But you can read this English translation of it if you don't know the Hebrew or don't want to attempt it. Rock of my salvation, is pleasant to sing your praises. Let our house of prayer be restored. So you can see that it's talking about the temple. And there we will offer you our thanks. So one of the things about Hanukkah right now for our Jewish people is that it's a reminder of the Maccabean revolt of the things that were going on before, because they don't have a temple. And so now they're in America and they have liberty. They have freedom. They can study Torah. If they're in Israel, they can study the Torah. They have liberty to do it, but very few Jews do. And there's no temple to worship in anyway. And maybe that's why they're so irreligious these days. I don't know. But my soul was sated with misery. And of course, this puts Israel, it kind of personifies Israel. My strength was spent with grief. They embittered my life with hardship. When enslaved under the rule of Mitzrayim, but Elohim with his mighty power brought out his treasured people, while Paro's host and followers sank like a stone into the deep. These are quotations of verses, or at least themes that are found in the scriptures. He brought me to his holy abode. There I found no rest. The oppressor came and exiled me because I served strange God, drank poisonous wine, yet scarcely had I gone into exile when Babel fell and Zerubbabel took charge. Within 70 years, I was saved. So he's summarizing kind of between Moshe and Jeremiah there. The Agagite, looks like I got a misspelled word there. Son of Hamedata plotted to cut down the lofty fir tree. What is that?
That's that Xmas tree.
Yeah,
Mordecai.
but who is that? Who is the Agagite we're talking about there?
Don't know.
It's Haman.
It's Haman, yes. It's Haman of Purim fame.
Mm.
That happened before Antiochus happened. So that's why this song is quoting it. You know, Purim falls, technically it falls after Hanukkah in the yearly cycle. Historically, it happened before it. And so he mentions it here. The Greeks gathered against me in Hasmonean days. The Hasmonean Empire is what was going on. I believe that was the sort of the Pharisaical age in Israel. And the Greeks gathered against me. They broke down the walls of my towers, defiled all the oils, but from the last remaining flask, a miracle was wrought for the lilies. Therefore, sages of the day ordained these 8 nights for songs of praise. Bear your holy arm, hasten a time of salvation, wreak vengeance upon the wicked nation on behalf of your faithful servants. Deliver us as too long been delayed, and the evil days are endless. Oh, thrust the enemy into the shadows of death and set up for us the 7 shepherds. Does anybody know what that's talking about? Don't everybody speak at once.
It seems like that's some end times illusion.
Yeah.
Yep, 7.
So the enemy cast the enemy into the shadow
Millennium?
of death. So that
Maybe the 7 spirits of Abba?
Yeah.
Does it have to do with the menorah?
I believe that's exactly what it is, because there's only one verse that talks about that, and I want to say it's in Amos. I think Amos is the one that mentions the 7 shepherds. It's one of the minor prophets. It mentions the 7 shepherds, but I don't believe that there is a literal group of 7 shepherds or angels who are going to do anything for Israel. I do believe that it's the shepherding that we've been getting from the Ruach HaKodesh for the last 2,000 years. Okay? That's what I believe it is. There's nothing else to speak of it. Okay, so I said that this is not a commanded feast, but back when I was learning about a Torah walk and ran across this, it did not trouble me that it was not in the Torah, because it is in the Brit Hadashah. I've already mentioned that. Who remembers where?
John 10. John 10, is it 10? Yeah, John 10.
Did you find it? There it is. Verse 22.
22.
The Chag of Khanukah at Jerusalem. Why would he call it a Chag?
Because it's like a Sukkot out of season?
Because Sukkot is one of the 3 feasts that are called a Chag, and Hanukkah is a Sukkot out of season, and it's a festivity. It's a festival. At Jerusalem, and it was winter, and Yeshua was walking in the Heichal in Shlomo's porch. Then the Yehudim surrounded him and said to him, "How long do you vex our soul with uncertainty? If you are the Mashiach, tell us openly. I have told you, but you do not trust, yet the works which I do." But if you look at what he's teaching just before he goes to Jerusalem. We don't know on what day of Hanukkah he went to Jerusalem. So I personally believe that because of the theme that he's teaching up here, that it was already Hanukkah, and he just took it to Jerusalem with it. And the reason I believe that is because this passage is talking about the false shepherd. Okay? The sheep do not follow a stranger, but they run away from him. My sheep know my voice. A thief comes except to steal, kill, and destroy. The hired person is not the shepherd. When he sees the wolf coming, he leaves the sheep and runs away. The wolf comes and seizes and scatters the sheep. The hired person runs away because he is hired and does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me. Just as Avi knows me, I also know Avi. And I lay down my life for the sake of the sheep. I have other sheep also, okay? This is why Avi loves me, because I lay down my life. And so he gives that speech about a false shepherd. And our Jewish people have been saying the prayer about 7 shepherds. And then we're told it's Hanukkah. And he goes to Jerusalem for Hanukkah. And they say to him, "It's not because of your good works that we stone you, but because you blaspheme." And here he says, It's written in your Torah, I have called you gods. If he called them gods because of the Devar Elohim was with them, and the scripture cannot be broken, why to the one whom I've consecrated and sent to the world do you say, you blaspheme just because I say to you, I am Ben Ha-Elohim? Okay? So he was almost stoned during Hanukkah, but he escaped out of their hands, and he went away to the Arden crossing where Yochanan was, and he remained there. Okay? Any thoughts or questions about that? Do you see the theme? Hello?
Processing, man, processing.
Bueller.
Well, you had Antiochus Epiphanes come in and run the Kohanim out of Israel. The Maccabees stood up, but nonetheless, he he pretended to be their god. He erected a statue of Zeus and stood in the temple and said, "I'm God." Okay.
So he was the I guess an example of the false shepherd
Yeah.
that Yeshua talks about. Okay.
Or at least there's some overtones of it there. And then of course
Right.
down here, they wanted to stone him, and Yeshua escapes. And they wanted to stone him based on the confession that he is the Son of God. So he's starting to get, if you're not familiar with it, this is toward the end of Yeshua's 3.5-year ministry. So he's starting to be more open about who he is. And here he calls himself the Son of God in front of these Jewish rabbis in Jerusalem during Hanukkah. Okay? So that brings me to one of the reasons that we celebrate it. One of the main reasons that we celebrate it is because we know because we have multiple historical witnesses that Hanukkah happened on the 25th of Kislev. Okay, so that is a fixed date, right? And everybody will just have to trust that is a historical. It's a matter of historical fact. Okay, and it's also a matter of historical fact that Hanukkah 25th is 9 months before Sukkot, which is 9 months later on the 15th of the 7th month. I'm going to let that sink in. Is everybody with me? Count it up in your head. Go from December to September.
Could you repeat what you just said?
Hanukkah is a fixed known date. It's the 25th of Kislev. It starts on that date every year. Mm-hmm. Sukkot is the same way. We know God said it very plainly that Sukkot is on the 15th day of the 7th Chodesh. When I say the 9th Chodesh, the 9th month, I'm talking about biblical months, because the temple was in operation during this time, except for that little short period where it was defiled for 2.5 to 3 years or whatever it was. So 9 months exactly from Hanukkah is the gestation period of a human baby. Mm-hmm. From Hanukkah to Sukkot. And in one of our former lessons, I think we went a long way in proving that Yeshua was born on Sukkot. So if he was born on Sukkot, what I'm trying to show you is that then, and I believe he was, then it's emphatic that he was conceived in Hanukkah.
So festival of light, the light of the world.
Exactly. So you had Sukkot references at Yeshua's birth, like we talked about last week, and now at his conception, you're having Sukkot references. You're having the end of life and the beginning of life. You're having the destruction of one thing and the creation of a new thing. You're having themes of Hanukkah are matching up with Yeshua's conception. So Yeshua, everybody celebrates his birth, and that's a wonderful thing, but that's not the big deal. The big deal is how he was conceived. Wouldn't you say?
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yes.
He was born by way of the same way that every other human being was born. We all came through the birth canal. We all were born covered in blood. We're born of flesh. We're born through a particular highway. It happens all the time. It happens every day, all over the world still. And it's a miracle. But Yeshua's miracle of birth was no different. I can't stand it when they say the miracle of Yeshua's birth. That was no miracle no different than anybody else's birth. The miracle was the fact that he was conceived by God himself in the womb of an unwed mother,
Yep.
a virgin. That's the miracle. And that's why I celebrate Khanukah. That's why I decided years ago, we're going to do this. Okay? And somebody told me once something about the first 8 days after conception. I can't remember if anybody is a medical person and remembers that, flag me, but I've forgotten it since then. If it's true, I need to write it down if it ever crosses my path again. But there's something supposed to be kind of miraculous about the first 8 days of conception. It doesn't matter to me. What you're seeing here is the festival of lights and liberty and salvation and freedom for Israel are being celebrated, at a time when Yeshua was conceived. And that was a miraculous time. Miriam gave one of the best blessings that we put in our Siddur. When the Malach told her that she was going to conceive and bring into the world Yeshua, who will save his people from their sins. And so that's what I'm celebrating at Khanukah, is the fact that Yeshua was conceived during this time. That's a huge miracle to me. And it got buried. It got buried by Christmas. And it puts his birth at Christmas. The pagan ritual puts his birth at Christmas when that's 9 months early. He's not here yet. The miracle is his conception. And so, and that to me is similar to this miracle of whatever the nature of the miracle was of having oil in order to light the menorah. That's what Yeshua did, is light the menorah and give us, he was conceived by what? What does it say in the scriptures?
Ruach HaKodesh.
Ruach HaKodesh. So it's the miracle of the Ruach HaKodesh that brought Yeshua into the world. Okay? And that's the 7 shepherds. And we're celebrating it for 8 days. And we're celebrating light, the inception of light in the darkest time of the year. Okay? And if you haven't had your head in the sand, then you know that December, both physically and spiritually, is the darkest time of the year. I don't know if the statistics hold true, but years ago I studied it, and there were more suicides at Christmas time during that season than any other time of the year. It may still be true, but it's a dark time of the year, spiritually, and certainly physically. It's the shortest day of the year is during that time. So we're celebrating the light of the world and the giving of our Messiah from the throne of heaven. It's a wonderful thing to celebrate.
And the light of the world was given at one of the darkest times in Jewish history, or the history of the world at that time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a wonder.
They were being persecuted. They weren't allowed to read the Torah. They weren't allowed to teach their children. They weren't allowed to circumcise their children. It was dark in Israel at the time. Spiritually, it was very, very dark. And physically, they were persecuted. They were killed if they were caught doing any of those things. So yeah, it was a very dark time.
And it was a miracle for them to get the right to do those things, to be able to have religious freedom.
Exactly. And so that to me is a greater miracle, and it is all sort of echoed in the conception of Yeshua. I mean, people have trouble separating that when they celebrate Christmas. They jam it all into one episode, and they don't really ponder and celebrate the conception of Yeshua, which is, to me, I mean, I'd like to see it happen again. It ain't gonna happen again. Nobody can pull that off. So So, to conceive a man child by the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, that's a huge deal. So that's why
All
we
those years,
celebrate.
and all those years, I just thought it was a Jewish alternative to Christmas. But
Yeah,
wow.
and in some ways, that's what a lot of Jews have turned it into, but that's not what we're attempting to do.
Sure.
So,
Well, so many false religions and stuff borrow this idea of having some sort of divine, like the mythological gods and whatnot. And it almost seems like Yeshua is contrasting him with all the false, contrasting himself as the true light of the world with all of the false counterfeits that have arisen over the years, and singles out that his own sheep will hear him. And I see allusions to the Netzal, to the people being born again, to the resurrection. He's going to turn around and raise Lazarus from the dead in the very next chapter. And it's all these things you're talking, it's just your brain explodes at all that's just right under the surface of the text.
exactly. And so if Yeshua did not want to call any attention to this feast, I don't think we would have it in the book of Yochanan. And so if it were a pagan feast, like I've heard some Messianic people say, then I don't believe it would be in our scriptures. Yeah. And if it were in our scriptures, it would have been condemned, right, if it were pagan. And so Yeshua goes into Jerusalem and does not say anything about you shouldn't be keeping this feast you're keeping, but instead kind of calls on the themes of it, at least to some degree, in order to teach during that season. So I think there is something to it. And further than that, you have from history, you should be able to find them on the internet. I have found them in times past and used them for reference, but there's little tiny Chanukias from the 1st century in Jerusalem that have been found. They only had 8 lamps on them, and what they were, just because we're all Western modern people, and the lamps that we have are entirely different from what they had back then. You know Aladdin's lamp?
Yeah.
From the Disney movie? That's what a menorah, a Chanukia, looked like in the 1st century. It was basically a handheld lamp, had a little handle on it, and it had a little bowl, and it had a little spout on the end, and it had a little lid on it, and the lid had a hole in it to put a wick in. Well, the Chanukia had 8 holes to put 8 wicks in. And it is in the Mishnah as a feast that was celebrated. It's a very brief entry in the Mishnah, but nonetheless, it's already there, and it describes that. And archaeology proves that it did go on in the time of Yeshua. So people that say it's a later Jewish feast, they made it all up. No, they didn't make it all up. The book of Maccabees was written as a historical book, and it's a decent history book. It's not divinely inspired. That's why it's not in our Bibles. But nonetheless, it does record historical events. And those documents are supported by other history as well, other ancient documents as well. So it is a legitimate event. Yeshua didn't decry it, and in fact sort of gives it a nod, and I think there is more to it. Plus, there are how many branches on a menorah?
7.
7. And so how many feasts are there, yearly feasts?
7.
There are 7 feasts. If you start in the spring with Pesach and you add Hanukkah to it, where does it go on the menorah?
8.
It'd be the 8th spot, right?
Right.
And it is 8th in the calendar year, right?
Yep.
How many candles are on a modern Chanukia?
9.
9. Is there another feast that we could add to this menorah?
Purim.
Purim.
Mhm.
Okay. Also not a commanded feast. But nonetheless, a chag that is celebrated in the scriptures. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, I was thinking of the ninth candle. I wasn't even thinking in terms of another feast. I was thinking in terms of that one candle, what you call the servant candle. That one candle lighting the other candles being indicative of the Ruach. Because that Ruach has to go spread the light to the other.
Well, I see it as Yeshua, because Yeshua is the light of the world.
Right, okay.
Okay. And it is his Ruach that gives it. So you're on the right track. But I see that ninth shamash, that candle, the shamash candle, as a picture of Yeshua himself, who
Gotcha.
gives light to everybody else. But the point that I'm making with the ninth feast is, and that would be our servant candle, if you will, because it's number 9. Okay. Number 8 would be a second Sukkot, because that's what Hanukkah is. Purim falls at the very end of the year. Okay. And so if we're looking at the feast, I believe that those represent the 7,000 years of man. So Hanukkah would be an 8th feast, right? 8 is the number of infinity. Hanukkah is about liberty. I've taught you that Yeshua coming back and putting his foot down is about liberty, right?
Mhm.
And it's not final until he banishes the wicked into outer darkness and throws the world away, balls it up like a scroll and throws it away, creates a new heaven and a new earth, and then we start infinity. So that could be what Hanukkah is symbolic of. More light. Plus, we'll be in the presence of God at that point, right? Everybody will be seeing God face to face on a daily basis.
And
Much
8
more
being
like-
eternity.
You realize that?
Mhm.
And 8 being eternity.
8 means infinity, eternity. Yes, absolutely. And so I think that's what Hanukkah can represent. And so the 9th one, how would Purim, if you can remember themes of Purim, what does that look like? How would you draw on Purim to sort of depict a shamash, if you will?
I don't know the first thing about Purim.
Okay, well, we're going to have to remedy that.
That's why we're here.
That's right.
The servant who stood up to save to
Malachi. That's a shamash.
Not Malachi.
Esther.
Esther.
I believe it would be Esther. Esther is the bride. I believe it's a combination of Esther and Mordecai.
That's who I meant. Dang it.
That's who
Sorry.
you were talking about.
I know. Sorry about that.
All right. Now, back up in history, I told you the 1st century menorah only had 8 lamps in it. Where did the 9th one come from? I've taught this for years, so some of you should know.
Say it again, what?
The menorah that in the 1st century that looks like an Aladdin's lamp with 8 holes in it had 8 lights. Where did the 9th light on a Khanukah come from?
I heard somebody made a mistake when they put the order in.
That's what I thought. It was a mistake, and they took it like that.
Yes. In all likelihood, it was a Gentile silversmith or goldsmith or whatever, so whoever. So somewhere in Ashkenazi Germany, somewhere in Germany, some Jews ordered some Hanukkahs, and they accidentally made a whole bunch of them with 9 lamps on it. And so instead of trying to, because they didn't have time to redo the order or remanufacture them, however it went, they added the 9th one and decided to call it they kept the 9th one and decided to call it a shamash, and they instituted the shamash. And I think that happened in like 1500 AD, something like that, maybe a little bit before. But so it was a Jewish accident. And it can't be any more beautiful representation of Yeshua to me. To have one single lamp that gives light to all the other lamps. Okay, so do you see how all these things are tying together? And so in the book of Esther, you had Mordecai and Hadassah, and you had Hadassah hiding her name and hiding her Jewishness and becoming the queen of Babylon, okay? And renaming her to Ishtar. That's what Esther means. It's actually Ishtar. They named her after their chief goddess. And she saves the Jewish people from utter destruction, just like Hanukkah does. And Mordecai is in the background. He would be, to me, representative of the Ruach HaKodesh. He's the one in the background who goes and saves the king and doesn't even blink at trying to get attention for it or reward for it, and that's used in his favor. And in our Hanukkah song, we had the Agagite, son of Hamidata. That was a reference to Mordecai, to Haman. And so you have this wedding theme going on, that she's been married, she's won her brideship, if you will. She's become the bride, she's become the actual queen, and she gets the opportunity to save all of Israel. So I think it all ties together. Is anybody with me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it actually kind of sounds like when Yeshua comes back with his bride and stops the destruction of the Jews right at the end of the tribulation.
Absolutely. And again at the end of the millennium,
Yes.
because there's a final war at the end of where the Gog and Magog war happens, is at the end of the millennium, not before and not during the tribulation and not at the end of the tribulation. That's not Gog and Magog. That Gog and Magog war that Ezekiel talks about is not until the end of the millennium. And so there is a second sort of, it's almost like a final hurrah of this whole theme of protecting God's people and Jerusalem, which represents his throne, from destruction. Because that's what they would be rebelling against, is the very throne of Yeshua, which is essentially the throne of God in Israel. So that's the theme of all of this. And so that's why Haman is so peeved at Mordecai, because he gets exalted, you know? So I believe that it's possible that that's another illusion that ninth candle gives you, is we have a totality of all the feasts, even though two of the feasts aren't commanded. And just in the same way, two of the candles on the menorah, on a Khanukah, are not commanded, but yet they play a role. Any thoughts?
Not a coinky dink.
Much to be a coincidence to me. It's just, you know, I see the finger of God in that. I don't know about y'all, but I see the finger of God in that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I do have a question, and that may be irrelevant or it may be trivial or whatever, but I wrote a note here to ask you about it when we had a time. But the servant candle, back to the Hanukkah, whatever, the Shamash, right? Is that how you said it?
Yes.
Is that, I keep thinking Shamash sounds a whole lot like Shema.
It's not
Is
the
there
same.
any kind of,
It comes from the word Shemesh, which means sun, S-U-N in the sky. If I'm not mistaken, it's the same root word as that. I could be wrong, because homonyms kind of get me every once in a while in Hebrew. But it's Shamash, which means servant. It's obviously that first syllable, and part of the second syllable does sound like Shema, but it's not related.
okay.
Shamash is the word used that gets translated as deacon. over in the New Testament. It's supposed to be a humble servant.
Okay.
And so that's why that one, but it's interesting to me that that one is lit first. And the reason I say that that is more like a picture of Messiah to me is because he was lit first. That's what his conception is. It's the fact that he's the firstborn from among the dead. He is the light of the world. No one else is. He is. He's the source of all spiritual light. That's Yeshua. So that's why that Shamash to me represents him. And of course, it is his Ruach. It's by the power of the Ruach, but it's him himself.
And he said he came to serve too.
Yeah, that's right. And so I don't know how many of you have this book.
Is that Purim?
Yes.
Yeah, I have it. We have it.
Okay. I don't know if they're available because I think our publisher might have went down. I haven't gotten not one email from them. So we may have to do another round of publishing ourselves once January gets here, if we're still here. But this is just it's called a Megillah. So the word Megillah means scroll. And so it became tradition, and I believe you can see this at the end of the book of Esther, to actually read the scroll, the Megillah, the Esther scroll on Purim, and recount the victory that Esther secured for Israel. And so we do it because of the overtones that are in it. There are very, very messianic overtones in the book of Esther that most people miss. And so I'm going to read you some of the nuggets out of here. We don't have time to go into everything, but there are some nuggets in here that you can't get as an English reader of this book. So, and what I mean by nuggets is so the way this is formatted, a lot of times, let me describe the celebration. Most of you know, but some of you don't. Purim is celebrated, it typically comes in mid to late February to early and mid-March. That's usually when Purim is. It's 1 month almost exactly before Passover, unless there's a 13th month. So, it's 2 days because at the end of the book of Esther, it says in Paras, in Persia, they did it on this day, and the rest of the outlying countries, they did it on this day. So we celebrate the Israel date most of the time, unless there's a conflict with our schedule, some other day going on in our schedules, building issues or something like that. So we're not concerned about missing. We have some leeway with it because it is a 2-day celebration. So typically we pick the Israeli date, but if we have to, we're not so concerned if we have to move it to the other date. So it's the 13th of Adar, if I'm remembering that correctly, is when the date is. The 13th and 14th, either that or the 14th and 15th of Adar, the 11th month, 12th month. Yeah, the 12th month. So Purim is celebrated usually by what's called a spiel. And a spiel it can be a play based on the book of Esther, but it's at least the reading of the scroll, and with a great levity, with lots of noise, with lots of joviality. There are traditions in Judaism that have gone way too far, in my opinion. Like there's rabbis that say you have not celebrated Purim if you're not lying down drunk. Well, that goes against our scriptures. We're not supposed to get lying down drunk. So we won't do that. It's long been accustomed to dress up in costumes, but our Jewish people have taken it so far and basically turned it into a Jewish Halloween, and they do it for a week in Israel. If you go to Israel during Purim, it's disgusting. It's like being in San Francisco during Halloween, or in Louisiana for Mardi Gras.
It's more like Louisiana, Mardi Gras.
It reminded you of
It was
Mardi Gras.
bad.
So Jeanette and Maureen were in Israel this year for Purim, and it reminds you of Mardi Gras, doesn't it?
It
disgusting.
was bad.
Yeah, it's disgusting the way they behave. So that's not the Purim that we celebrate. And so they typically don't even give Esther a nod. It's just more about dressing up in the costume and making the costume and trying to have the best costume. It's basically Halloween on steroids over there. So in our community, what we do is dress in biblical costumes and reenact the story and try to teach from it and to learn something about Messiah in this story. This is what is so unique about the book of Esther. Esther, what's so unique about it?
The word God is not anywhere in it.
There's not one reference to God the Creator in it anywhere. There's allusions to him and there's hints about him. There's prayer, there's fasting, but there's not one mention of him by name or by title. Okay? So that to me is curious. And where are they?
Where are what?
Where are Esther and Mordecai?
Oh,
Babylon?
Babylon?
No,
Shushan.
No.
No.
They're in Persia, Shushan.
Persia. Shushan the palace, which is a Persian palace.
Hmm.
So what we have done is create an abridged version of the book of Esther. So it has quotes. The first part of each chapter, the book is 10 chapters, just like the book of Esther is, and it's the first part of it is in Hebrew, and that's straight out of the book of Esther in Hebrew. And then that same paragraph starts the English. And so you get one paragraph out of the actual scriptures, and then you get a summary of the rest of that chapter. All right? That's what we've done. And that's kind of common among what's called a Megillah. If you buy an Esther Megillah, you're getting something like that. I'm not the first person to do it. But this is the first one to me that is really and truly Messianic in tone. And it has teaching helps in it. So there's questions at the end of every chapter to get you thinking about it. And the nuggets that I was talking about is in here, there are some things about the text itself that you can't get by being an English reader. And I'm going to look for those as I go. We've got some time, so I'm not in a hurry. But you can toss questions out as we go if you want to. The first thing that you'll notice is that Queen Vashti, and who is she?
She was the first wife, and he banished her because she wouldn't do what he asked her to do.
That's right. He called her to court, and she didn't want to come, and she said, I ain't going, and she defied the king, and so he divorced her, basically, and commanded all women to obey their husbands. In the first chapter, she's called queen, and she is never called queen again after that. She's just called by her name. So that's kind of one of the first textual oddities you might notice is she stopped being called queen. So she has been dethroned in that first chapter. And in the first chapter, Ahasuerus is the king. Many people think it's Xerxes. There's some debate over who it is. Ahasuerus is the king, and he is described in what we would say are attributes that can only be attributed to the Creator. Okay, so that's just interesting to note. And you can go check the book of Esther and see that wording for yourself in chapter 1. In chapter 2, there is a eunuch named Haggai. And he is the eunuch that attends to Hadassah during her time in preparing to go and meet the king. And if you were to stick a yod in front of his name, it means he will meditate. And so Haggai here, to me, is a picture of the Ruach HaKodesh who prepares his bride, the bride of Messiah, for the wedding. That's his role in preparing Esther, Hadassah, to meet the king. How was her preparation different from the other virgins? Anybody remember?
Apparently not.
Nobody remembers. She didn't put on as much goop on her face. Her beauty was more natural.
Hmm.
She didn't adorn herself. She didn't take any jewels. She wore a plain Jewish dress. You know, she wore a regular dress. She didn't get all dazzled up.
She was really very much like Daniel to me.
Say that again?
He reminds me of Daniel in a way, because he didn't conform to the average rule either.
Right, yeah. So who remembers what Hadassah means?
Hey,
Don't all jump
that's
at
the word
once.
meditate. Isn't that what you just said with the U in front
That
of
was
it?
Haggai. I'm talking about
Oh, that's
Hadassah.
something. Hadassah. Okay, sorry.
Esther's Jewish name is Hadassah.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
What does it mean? It's myrtle. Myrtle. How is that significant?
We wave it at
Yeah.
Sukkot.
The coat.
It's part of the lulav. It's one of the 4 species that is waved in the lulav. That's exactly right. If you get this book, you'll see that there's a prophecy about myrtles as well. And I don't want to blow it for you if you want to read the book.
Yeah, don't blow it. I just bought it.
Yeah.
I think I got the last one too.
So one thing that you glean from the text, if you're paying attention, is that Esther becomes the bride of Ahasuerus in the 7th year of his reign. Does that ring a bell for you in any way?
Yes, millennial.
Yeah. Yes.
There you go. The 7th millennium is when we become the bride.
Wow.
Okay, so Eva has already brought up the fact that Esther sounds like Daniel, but Mordecai does too, because he refuses to bow when everybody is commanded to bow to Haman. All right? So
And also
Haman,
like,
say again?
sorry. I was saying also like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The other 3 guys with Daniel refused to bow before Nebuchadnezzar.
Exactly. So Haman wants everybody to bow to him, just like Nebuchadnezzar wanted everybody to bow to his statue. What are both of those guys prefiguring?
Sugar Hamashiach.
Mashiach HaSheker, false Messiah.
Mashiach, that, yes.
Just like Antiochus Epiphanes did. He wanted everybody to bow to him and call him God. So yeah, you're seeing some overtones of Mashiach HaSheker there. So we learn in chapter 3 that Haman is an Agagi, a son of Agag. Mordecai is a son of Binyamin and of Kish. Kish was the father So Mordecai would have been a grandson of Kish, which is a man, who was a Benjamite. Kish, the man, was the father of King Shaul. Shaul was instructed by Shmuel, Samuel, to kill all the Amalekites whose leader was Agag. So Haman is not only an Agagite, like our Hanukkah song said, but he's also an Amalekite. Shaul did not kill all the sons of Agag, right?
Right.
So Israel suffered for that. Mordecai knows this because he's a devout man, and he chooses not to bow to the Agagite. Might that be why? Just for your information, Amalek attacked Israel from behind, where the young and the weak and the nursing mothers might have traveled at the back of the caravan, if you will. So Amalek's name, God told Moshe, who remembers when Amalek first attacked Israel?
Was Saul?
No.
When they were in the wilderness?
After they crossed the Red Sea.
It's their very first enemy.
Yes.
And so they came through the Red Sea. They were barely in the wilderness for any time. God had just given them the Sabbath and the manna, and all of a sudden Amalek attacks them, and he attacks them from the rear. And this is when Moshe is up on the mountain holding his hands, and you got Hur on the right and Aaron on the left holding up his hands, and as long as his hands are up, they're winning. If he lets his hands down, they lose, and Yehoshua is down on the battlefield fighting the battle, looking up toward Moshe. All of that is very, very symbolic stuff. But this is who Mordecai is choosing not to bow to, is the son of Amalek. Okay? God told Moshe when that was done that the name of Amalek would be blotted out forever. And one of the things we do at Purim during the spiel while we're reading this concerning Haman, what is it?
We boo.
We boo and hiss and rattle cloggers to make noise to blot out his name because he is an Amalekite.
Some people write Haman on the bottom of their shoe also
And
so
stomp.
they can stomp it.
That's right. You can put Haman on the bottom of your shoes and stomp when it's time. When you hear his name, you stomp and make noise and hoot and holler and deride him. And, and it becomes very fun, but what I want you to see is it's got a very, very deep spiritual meaning behind it. Okay? And all of this, Purim and Hanukkah both, are about victory over the enemies of Israel. That's what both of these are about. And I've taught this. I taught the book of Ezra and Nehemiah years ago. And the spirit of anti-Messiah is anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is rooted in being against Messiah, because the people of Israel are the chosen ones to bring Messiah into the world. And like it or not, Messiah is coming through the Jewish people. When he comes back, he's coming to Israel. He ain't coming to Texas. He ain't coming to Washington, D.C. He's coming to Jerusalem. Okay? So that's what you need to keep in mind. And the enemies, when you study the enemies of Israel, you're finding out about your own enemies and the enemies of the congregation of God. Okay. Let's see what chapter 4 holds. And I'm not reading the whole book, and I'm not giving you all the nuggets, okay? I'm just trying to highlight things that are very, very pertinent. How long did Esther fast? Does anybody remember?
3 days.
And?
Nights.
3 days and 3 nights.
3 days and 3 nights. 3 full days.
And it's specifically worded that way. And so there are 2 other things that are worded that way in the scriptures. What are they?
when Yeshua was grave?
Jonah and Yeshua.
Yonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. Yeshua was in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's amazing. True.
So Mordecai in chapter 4 is seen as fasting, putting on sackcloth and ashes, but it never actually says that he prays. Esther commands everybody to fast, but it never actually says that she prays. You don't hear a prayer recited. All you're knowing is that she's fasting, and she's asking all of Israel to fast with her. So the point of this is the faith of these people in Persia is hidden. Like we already said, God's name is not spoken, but there's no religious activity going on here. It's just fasting. And then a petition to the king. So you got to know that these Jewish people, when they fasted, they prayed. But my point is it doesn't come out and say that. All right, now here's a big one that I'm going to go ahead and give you. Haman, we've already said, is the son of Amalek. Amalek is one of only 3 men whose names are mentioned in Scripture long before they are born. This guy was predicted, I'm talking about Amalek, was predicted by name before he was born. Can you think of another one?
Cyrus.
Koresh, Cyrus, king of Paras, Persia, was named by Yeshayahu, Isaiah, before he existed. And he said that he would free the people of Israel. And sure enough, Cyrus is the one from Persia who writes the first decree so that Israel can go back and rebuild Jerusalem. So he was named in Scripture before he existed. Okay? So Amalek in Bereshit 14, Genesis chapter 14, verse 7, is 100 years before Amalek was born. He's mentioned there by name. Koresh, which is king of Paras, Persia, in Yeshayahu 45:1, is called the Messiah there, the anointed one. And that's about 100 years before he was born. And then Agag, in the Mashal, the prophecy of Bilam, in Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 24, verses 5 through 9, which is where we get our blessing, the Matovu, was years before Agag was actually born. Amalek starts with an Ayin and ends with a Kof. The Hebrew letters Ayin and Kof. Between the Ayin of Amalek, in other words, in Genesis 14:7, you see Amalek's name and there's an Ayin at the beginning of it. So between that Ayin in Genesis 14:7 and the Kof in Amalek of Genesis 36:12, there are 12,110 letters. That's the exact amount of the number of letters in the book of Esther.
Wow.
Wow.
Scared.
And that portion read on Shabbat before Purim from the Torah is Zachor, which begins, remember what Amalek did to you. So on every year on Shabbat before Purim, and the reading cycle was already established probably, but every year we're reading Zachor, the portion Zachor, and it says, remember what Amalek did. And that's a week before Purim.
Wow.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Chapter 5. So after her 3 days of fasting, she approaches the king. she's offered up to half the kingdom. I'm gonna skip a lot of these because we're only halfway through and we've got just a little bit of time left. It's in this chapter that Mordecai, Haman rejoices because he feels the queen's favor, and then he sees Mordecai and his emotions flip, and he decides to build a gallows for Mordecai.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, chapter 6. Ahasuerus, the king, discovers that Mordecai helped him. He wants to help him. It's late at night. Haman is in the court of the king when he should be in bed. He's not in bed. The king is up. Haman is up. He thinks that the king is going to reward him, but he ends up rewarding Mordecai. And so that reward is that he dresses Mordecai in the king's robes and puts him on a king's horse and honors him as if he were king. Does that remind you of anybody?
Yes. Yeshua.
A bit like Yeshua being paraded through the streets of Jerusalem, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Chapter 7. There's a lot of information in chapter 7. Esther reveals to the king that someone intends to destroy her people. She's still hiding. The king doesn't know she's Jewish. And she reveals to him only that her people are threatened to be destroyed. But Haman is an Amalekite descendant of Amalek through Agag, and here he's in the king of Persia's house, inciting Persia against the Jews. And where is Persia? What do we call it today?
Iran.
Iran. So you have an Amalekite in an Iranian city inciting violence and destruction against the Jewish people. And today, Iran is the loudest nation in the world inciting destruction against the Jewish people among the nations. I don't think that's a coincidence. There's some evidence. I'm just going to tell you that there's some evidence in chapter 7. It's a bit coincidental evidence or circumstantial evidence, but there's some evidence that it actually is Xerxes in there. The traditional date of Haman's demise and death is on the 17th of Nisan. That's the first month in the biblical calendar. And it fits the narrative. It's interesting to note that other very significant overtones of salvation occurred on the 17th of Nisan. The Ark of Noah rested on the mountains of Ararat on the 17th of Nisan. The crossing of Yam Suf, the Red Sea, in Shemot, Exodus chapter 14, was on the 17th of the first Chodesh, which is Nisan. And after the dedication of the Beit HaMikdash, commanded by King Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah, on the 17th of the first month, he greatly rejoiced because it had been done suddenly. So the house was freed up and they could dedicate the house, and Hezekiah is rejoicing on the 17th of Nisan. That's the day that Haman died. Yeshua rose from the dead on the 17th of Nisan. He was executed on the 15th, was in the grave 15, 16, and 17, and at the end of the 17th day, he arose from the dead. Think that's coincidence?
No coincidence.
Oh.
In the 8th chapter, it took 2 months for the decree to be written, to be sent to all the provinces. What happens is there was a decree written, and that decree had to go out. It takes time for things to go out. They couldn't just send it by email back then. They had to go out on horses. Had to go to every province in the Persian Empire in order to overturn Mordecai's decree, and that took a few months to do. There were 9 months left for the decree to slay the enemies of the Yudim to be enacted. All right, we've got just 2 chapters left, and they're very brief, so I'm going to go ahead and try to look and see if there's any nuggets I want to share out of those. You learn in chapter 9 that Haman had 10 sons. If you haven't figured it out, he's kind of a foreshadowing of the son of perdition, Mashiach HaSheker. I think we said that.
Yeah.
And the false Messiah in the book of Revelation is among 10 kings, is he not?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, as soon as you said 10 sons, I was thinking the 10 horns on
That's what I'm thinking.
So there's 10 horns on the beast in Revelation. There's 10 horns on the beast in Daniel as well. And so in the nations of the beast represented in Revelation 13, if you look on a modern map, that's Turkey, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. I've told y'all that's the nations of that beast rising from the sea. I'm just going to reiterate, many of you know this, but Persia is the bear, Iran is the bear, Babylon is the lion, so Iraq is the lion. And the rest of the nations are probably represented by the leopard, which was Greece in Daniel, but in the book of Revelation, it's still a leopard. All of these beasts become a single beast, is what I'm talking about. So in the book of Daniel, you had 4 individual beasts, but in the book of Revelation, it's a single beast. There's a combination. The head is a bear, the mouth is a lion, and the body is a leopard. That leopard is the Greece, which was Alexander's empire, and so that would be the rest of that whole swath of nations over there that are Islamic today. So the beast is Islamic, the harlot is Christian, that's clear to me, and the beast takes the harlot for a wife, if you will, and abuses her and then destroys her. And so you're seeing the beginning of that happening, I believe, politically today. but you're seeing an allusion to this in the book of Esther. And I'm going to just have to defer to the book and to Purim when we celebrate it, if we're here, in order to take advantage of the little bit of time we have left. But I want to read this to you. There are, in the names of the sons of Haman, and they are Parshandata, Dalfan, Aspata, Porata, Adalia, Aridata, Parmashka, Arisai, Aridai, Vaizaka. Those are 10 names. And in that verse that gives their names, there are 10 vowels. And some of those vowels are in front of et, the et, the et, the et, the et. The aleph and tav, which is a picture of Yeshua. So you have the name of a son, a nail in Yeshua. The name of a son, a nail in Yeshua. The name of a son, a nail in Yeshua. Do you see the imagery that I'm trying to evoke here?
Yes.
Mashiach HaSheker, 10 kings trying to destroy the congregation of Elohim. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't know this, there were 10 menorahs in the Beit HaMikdash. In the Temple of Shlomo, there were 10 menorahs other than the one standing in front of the veil. So that's 77 lamps in the room. Every week we read the verse that says, the Jews had light, happiness, joy, and honor. And we do that at the end of Shabbat while the light of the Sabbath is still burning. We read that verse to close out the Sabbath. The list of the sun starts in verse 7. It's represented with the letter Zayin, which is a sword. The 9th verse is a tet, whose symbol is a serpent. And the 11th, Vav, is in the 9th verse in the list of 10 sons in verses 7 through 10. It's enlarged. The reason I'm bringing all this up is because a Vav is a nail or a stake, if you will. And when we say gallows, what does that bring to your mind?
Hangman news.
Hangman's noose, like in an old Western, right?
Yep.
It's not what it was in Persia. It was a stake. They were impaled on it. Basically a nail. It was a vav standing in the ground, if you will. And of course, Yeshua carried a stake up a hill. And the reason I'm bringing all that up is because every one of these men were hung on a gallows that looked like a vav, and they had a vav in front of a vav and an aleph and tav in front of their names. Is everybody with me? It's difficult to say. But so if I could show you an image of it, you know, if you read it in Hebrew, you'll see ve'et parashta, ve'et dalphon, ve'et afsata, ve'et in front of each of these names of these sons. There was a nail and an aleph and a tav. Okay? You'll just, when you have to get you'll have more time to study it when you get the book and you can actually look at it and see what I'm talking about. But I think there is some mystery in that. So the last chapter is where Ahasuerus is ruling over the land. Everything is good and cool. He laid a tribute on the land. He's named again. Ahasuerus kind of sounds like the creator. All his acts of power and his might and the full account of his greatness and the greatness of Mordecai. The king advanced him. They're not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Madai and Paras. They are. And it says that Mordecai, the Yehudi, was next unto King Ahasuerus and great among the Yehudim. This is actually out of the text. Mordecai was the Yehudi, the Jew, was next unto King Ahasuerus and great among the Yehudim, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people and speaking shalom to all his seed. It's kind of like being at the right hand of the Creator, isn't it?
Oh, yeah,
Speaking shalom to all his seed.
absolutely.
And so that's very similar to the end of the Hikalut when Yeshua is standing at the right hand of the Creator. So we've got 10 minutes left. I know that was a little clunky just because I was trying to pick out pieces and parts of this. It may still be available on Amazon. If not, we'll have to come up with other ways to print it before Purim gets here. But
It said I took the last one.
you probably did if you just ordered it.
Good job, Tracy.
But do you see, hopefully you're seeing that everything that we do in celebration, including Khanukah and Purim, those two feasts seem to me to be alluded to on the Chanukiah, where you have a 7-branch menorah, which is the Ruach HaKodesh, which is symbolic of all the feasts. I have been posting on a logo on the announcements for this study and on the YouTube channel for this study, that menorah that has the 7 feasts on it. So I probably need to make one that has all 9 on it, a Chanukiah, and show all of the feasts. Okay? So I will attempt to do that this week and then post it somewhere, just so you have a mock-up of it and can remember it a little bit easier. But I want you to remember, I'm going to put them where the Purim, where the Shamash would be at the end. And you'll see that in some Chanukiahs where the Shamash is away and separate from the other 8. Okay? God doesn't do anything by accident. There are some Messianic people who do not read the book of Esther, will not celebrate the Feast of Purim, will not do it. And they don't believe that Esther is divinely inspired. And just the nature of the Hebrew things that I showed you, the number of letters between those two passages that begins with the first letter of Amalek and the last letter of Amalek, it can't be coincidental. No human could have planned that by writing the exact number of letters between those verses in the book of Esther. You with me? And,
Yeah, how would you
Yes.
do
and Esther has been in the canon for a long, long time. Plus, it's a historically accurate book. There are some people that don't think so, but I believe it is. There is enough history there. I'm a historian, and to me, there is enough history there not to discredit it as a completely fictional book. But a lot of people do. I'm going to tell you, you're going to run across that where a lot of people discredit everything about the book of Esther. But I'm not going to take it out of the Bible. And when I read it, I see so much about Yeshua. The nature of the relationship of Esther to the king is illusory to Yeshua. Nature of Mordecai to Israel is illusory to Yeshua. I mean, there's just so many overtones in it that look like Messiah and that even look like the end of the age. So to me, it's very, a pure celebration of it is very, very fun to do. Thoughts, questions, comments on any of it? This whole study, this is 16 weeks and we're done.
I'm tracking with all of it, but I got to go back and study about Purim a little bit more. Actually, read Esther. I don't think it's been, gosh, how many years since I read it.
Yeah.
So I just had to go back and study it and read it and get a good grasp of it again to get a full understanding.
Yeah.
Using the book of Esther and the various characters and situations being archetypal, for Haman to say they don't have the same laws as you do, in the sense all of us break God's laws, and it's only going to be an action of His in us that will make us capable of not breaking His laws. In that sense, the Jews could deserve death from a biblical point of view because they weren't keeping, from an archetypal point of view.
Right.
And then they receive this deliverance through the actions of Mordecai and Esther, which is very much the way that we are saved from the law of sin and death by Yeshua. So that's very archetypal also.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of benefit to studying Esther. There's too much that, and everybody knows that it's a bridal theme. The whole Messianic ministry, if you will, the theme of it is a bridal theme. I mean, we talked about this way back in the study. The Passover was our betrothal. Yeshua betrothed us to himself at the Passover Seder when he took that third cup. And of course, we're going to consummate the wedding on Yom Teruah, perhaps this year. Would to God that it would happen this year. It couldn't happen soon enough for me. I think I'll be a little bit heartbroken if it doesn't, but because I know him and I have him, I won't be completely heartbroken, but I'm like, come on. Come on already. It's getting crazy down here. These people are driving me crazy. So, it's a bridal theme, and the book of Esther is she's the quintessential bride. She's the most beautiful of the land, and she becomes the queen of the land. In spite of it, she basically dethrones a queen, or the queen is dethroned so that she can take a throne. And that's a picture of me, of the harlot being cast off, and the real congregation of Messiah actually becoming queen.
Wow.
Look at that. Because the harlot Bavel has been around for 2,000 years almost. 1,700. I'll give it 1,700 years at least. That we've been under the rule of a rebellious queen. And she's going to be cast off. That's what Revelation 18 is. And then in chapter 19, the bride shows up. So there is just so much. It's a lot to digest in 40 minutes, or an hour, or however long we took, 50 minutes. But I do believe it is very symbolic of that Shamash candle. And I just think that it kind of sews it all up very well. It's a good way to end the year and get to thinking about Messiah coming. Or, before you start over, you're kind of celebrating infinity beyond infinity at that point, And
Hallelujah.
I think it's relevant for us as Messianic people to celebrate that, but to see the feast as a whole, as a roadmap of prophecy, is the main thing that I wanted you to get out of this, and see how hopefully what you got out of this whole study for 16 weeks is tying it all together into our lives and seeing how what we do as Messianic people is very prophetic, and it reminds us of these things. And what I wanted you to be able to do is, as you go through them this year, if we're here another year, that you see these things, that you're reminded of them, and you grow and appreciate them more.
I will say that I was seeing some of that, excuse me, in the daily prayers. And then after we went through that portion of it, going through the daily prayers, I really see it, and like they just stand out in my mind every time now.
Excellent. That's good to hear. If you do keep Purim with us in the spring or in the winter, at the end of winter, then hopefully you'll see that, and that for Hanukkah, hopefully you'll understand that, it's a Sukkot out of season, but the main thing is everybody else is celebrating the birth of Yeshua, and he wasn't born at that time. They're celebrating the birth of the Son. They're celebrating the birth of a false Messiah in a lot of ways, even though they don't know it. And I'm not condemning everybody that does it. I'm saying they're doing it on the wrong day. They're duped. They're deceived. And what we should be celebrating is his virgin birth, the conception that causes birth, because the conception is the greater miracle, not his birth. All right. We give thanks for this whole study. We ask you, Abba, that you bless it, that you correct our error where we may be wrong, right us, and what we have learned that is your truth, let us hold on to it and grow by it. And let us be able to be light to those around us and be ministers of your good news to those around us. And we thank you for all of this in the name of your Son, Yahweh Yeshua Mashiach. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you,
No,
Daniel, so much.
Good.
I
Thank
wanna-
you.
I wanna
Lala
announce
Tov,
about-
everybody.
Alato.
All right, everybody's gonna leave before they get the announcements.
No, no, no,
Wait,
I'm not leaving, I'm
listening.
waiting.
Listening.
We're not gonna have study next week. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna take a break until after Sukkot. The feasts are coming up. I'm trying to finish the Brit Hadashah. I'm so close, I can feel it, you know. I'm about 8 to 10 days away from being with the final cut of the Hebrew before I go back and edit and fix things that I know need to be fixed. So I want to take the season anytime that I have between now and the feast to actually finish that and get it done, so that when we start in Genesis, we have it at least in PDF format to use for the next year. So,
Awesome.
so I'm going to take a break from the Torah study, plus to prepare for the next Torah study, which you guys may or may not have seen this, but it came in. This is the printed proof. It was the one that they sent to me in order to, so I can make sure that I liked it. And so the rest of them are on their way, should be here maybe tomorrow. I don't know. I haven't seen an email yet, but if not, then by next week we'll have them. So I want, if you guys think it's fruitful, think it's a good thing to do, I thought we would just teach this.
What is that?
Walk through it,
Great.
chapter by chapter. What is it, Joe?
Yeah, what is that book?
It's the Bar Mitzvah Study Guide.
Okay, yeah.
And so it was written for children, but it was written at a higher level to push them. And so adults also enjoy it. Is anybody on here who's actually kind of sat through it or used it at all?
I've sat through some of it, and it was very good.
Okay, so it kind of puts it all together. Everything that you've learned so far, and if you want to, you can go back and watch our previous videos up to this point. But this one kind of just, it's kind of a sew it all up kind of thing. Everything that we've just done over the last 22 weeks is basically summarized in here. And so it'll actually put it in your hands and organize it and give you a place to take notes, centralize your notes, that kind of thing. So I think it'll be a good thing to do. Plus it'll help me get a teacher's guide put together, because I can fill mine out as we go and then publish a teacher's guide for anybody that wants that has all the answers in it. And you can put the answers in it, and you can, it's a good book for references. It's got lots of citations, scripture citations in it. So on the Thursday after Sukkot is when we're going to start back up. I think that's the 15th of October, I think, is when we'll start back up, and we'll do this, okay?
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, Daniel. That's exciting.
Excellent. Shalom, shalom.
Well, good to see everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.